There was a stillness to the Hargrove estate that money could buy but not quite explain. It wasn't the stillness of a place that had never known chaos. It was the stillness of a place that had paid enough people, over enough years, to keep chaos at a respectful distance. The grounds were manicured to the point of intimidation. The driveway alone stretched nearly a quarter-mile, lined on both sides with ornamental dogwood trees that bloomed white every April like clockwork, as if even nature understood that punctuality was expected here. And sitting at the center of it all, in a climate-controlled, custom-built garage that had cost more to construct than most people's homes, were the cars. 14 of them, at last count. Not a single one bought for practicality. A 2021 Porsche 911 Turbo S in gentian blue metallic, worth $215,000. I sat gleaming beneath a recessed ceiling light like a jewel in a display case. Beside it, a 1973 Porsche 911 Carrera RS, one of only 1,580 ever made, sat behind a velvet rope that Cornelius Hargrove had installed, not as a joke, but as a sincere declaration. Look, but do not touch. There was a 2019 Porsche Cayenne Turbo, a 2022 GT3 RS in shark blue, and a 1989 Porsche 930 Turbo that Cornelius had tracked down through a private broker in Phoenix after a 2-year search. Cornelius Hargrove was 61 years old, 6 feet even, with silver hair that he kept cut close and hands that had never once changed a tire. He had made his fortune in commercial real estate, buying distressed properties in secondary markets throughout the Southeast during the 2009 crash and selling them at staggering multiples a decade later. His net worth, as of the previous year's Forbes regional feature on Atlanta's wealthiest citizens, was estimated at $340 million. He had a townhouse in Buckhead, a winter place in Naples, Florida, a ski cabin outside Aspen that he visited twice a year, and a standing reservation at a restaurant in Midtown Atlanta called Crestline, where he had eaten lunch on Tuesdays for 11 consecutive years. But Porsche was the love of his life that his ex-wife never quite understood, and his children merely tolerated. He subscribed to 4 separate Porsche publications. He was a member of the Porsche Club of America's Atlanta Region chapter. He attended track days at Road Atlanta twice a year and had, on one memorable weekend in 2019, posted the fastest lap time among the non-professional drivers in his run group, a fact he mentioned, on average, on once every 3 weeks. The problem, and there had been a problem for going on 7 months now, was the 911 Turbo S. It had started in September of the previous year. A slight hesitation at high RPM, barely perceptible, the kind of thing most drivers wouldn't notice. But Cornelius Hargrove noticed everything about his cars, the way a musician notices a note slightly out of tune. He'd brought it to Pinnacle European, the dealership-affiliated service center in Alpharetta, where he'd bought 4 of his 6 newer Porsches. They'd run diagnostics, charged him $1,800 in labor and parts for a fuel injector cleaning and updated software. The hesitation remained. He'd brought it back. They found a minor vacuum leak, replaced the intake manifold gaskets, charged him $3,400. The hesitation remained. He'd escalated. Where the service director at Pinnacle, a man named Graham Whitfield, had recommended an independent Porsche specialist in Marietta named Hendrick Automotive Performance. 3 visits. A new throttle body assembly, $4,200. A replacement high-pressure fuel pump, $6,800. A full suspension refresh that Whitfield had convinced Cornelius was contributing to overall drivability issues, another $9,400. 7 months. 4 different shops. 1 regional Porsche factory-trained technician who'd flown in from Charlotte at Cornelius's personal expense, and billed $450 an hour for 6 hours of his time. The total spend on the problem had crossed $31,000. The hesitation remained. Before we go any further, I want to know, where are you watching from right now? Drop your city in the comments. I'm always curious to see how far these stories reach. But the morning that everything changed began the way many consequential mornings do, without any outward sign of its own importance. It was a Wednesday in late April, and the temperature in Decatur, Georgia, had already climbed to 73 degrees by 9 o'clock. The kind of morning that felt like summer practicing its entrance. Cornelius's estate sat at the end of Whitmore Lane, a private road off Covington Highway that connected at its far end to a small commercial block of repair shops, a tire center, a collision shop, and a modest neighborhood diner called Perlin's. The shops on that block were nothing Cornelius had ever given a second glance. They were the kind of places his housekeeper, Denise, mentioned occasionally in passing, useful to her world, invisible to his. But the shop at the far end of the block had a hand-painted sign above the bay door that read, Carter's European Auto Repair, S to 2019. It occupied a building that had previously been a carpet warehouse, and before that, briefly, a tire recycling operation. The space was deep and well lit, with 6 lifts, a wall of snap-on tool chests so organized they looked like a museum exhibit, and floor drains so clean you could have eaten off them. There was no waiting room in the traditional sense, just 2 plastic chairs and a coffee maker near the front desk, where a whiteboard listed the week's appointments in blue dry erase marker. The man who owned Carter's European Auto Repair was named Marcus Carter. He was 34 years old, 5'11", with wide shoulders and hands that were perpetually stained with a faint ghost of grease no amount of pumice soap could fully remove. He had grown up 8 miles from where his shop now stood, in a rental house off Glenwood Road with his mother, Ruth Ann, and his younger sister, Brianna. His father, Theodore Carter, had worked as a master technician for 31 years at a GM dealership in Stone Mountain before a back injury forced his retirement. Theodore had been the kind of man who fixed things before they broke, and when they did break, he took them apart slowly, studied them with the patience of a man who genuinely loved the problem, and put them back together better than they'd been before. Marcus had grown up under a car hood the way other kids grew up with basketball courts. By the time he was 12, he could change brake pads. At 15, he had rebuilt a 1994 Honda Accord engine in the driveway with his father over a 3-day weekend. At 17, he'd done it alone. He'd turned down an academic scholarship to Georgia State. Not because he wasn't capable, his mother would tell anyone who asked, but because the classroom never held him the way an engine did. He'd spent 5 years working at a European independent shop in Decatur, a place called Conrad's, run by a German immigrant named Werner Conrad, who had worked on Porsches and BMWs in Stuttgart before emigrating in 1994. Werner had taken one look at Marcus's diagnostic work in the first week and decided to teach him everything he knew. It was Werner who first explained the particular complexity of the Porsche PDK transmission's interaction with the Mezger-derived engines. It was Werner who showed Marcus how to read a scope pattern the way a doctor reads an EKG, not just noting abnormalities, but understanding the story the waveform was telling. Werner retired in 2018 and sold the shop to a buyer who promptly ran it into the ground. Marcus took his savings, a small SBA loan, and the snap-on tool chests Werner had gifted him, and opened Carter's European on a Tuesday in March of 2019 with 2 employees and 1 lift. By 2022, he had 6 lifts, 4 employees, and a waiting list of 2 weeks for non-emergency appointments. He had never advertised. Every customer he had came through word of mouth, a neighbor's BMW fixed right on the first try, a church member's Audi diagnosed in 30 minutes after another shop had misread it for 3 weeks. The Marcus Carter had built his shop the same way his father had built everything, one honest job at a time. His mother, Ruth Ann, was the one who cleaned the Hargrove estate. She had worked for Cornelius Hargrove for 9 years, 3 mornings a week, Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. She was 58 years old, a woman of considerable dignity who wore her graying locks pinned back while she worked and kept a small Bible in her purse at all times, not performatively, but practically, the way someone keeps a flashlight in their glove compartment. She was thorough, professional, and silent unless spoken to, which suited Cornelius Hargrove perfectly. He respected competence and left alone the people who demonstrated it. He called her Mrs. Carter, and she called him Mr. Hargrove, and in 9 years, though their conversations had not extended much beyond those formalities. The morning it changed, Ruth Ann arrived at the estate at her usual time, 7:45, and let herself in through the side entrance near the kitchen. As she moved through the house, she noticed that the door to the garage, which adjoined the main house through a utility corridor, was standing open. Cornelius was in there, pacing. This was unusual. Cornelius did not pace. He moved with the deliberate, measured certainty of a man who decided where he was going before he stood up. He was on the phone. "I don't care what the diagnostic says, Graham. I've been hearing what the diagnostic says for 7 months, and that car still doesn't drive right." A pause. His voice had the tight, controlled quality of a man holding back something larger. "I've spent $31,000. $31,000. And you're telling me you want to replace the entire ECU? That's another $12,000 on a car I paid $215 for, and I want a guarantee that it fixes it. Not a maybe. A guarantee." Another pause. Longer. Whatever Graham Whitfield was saying on the other end did not satisfy him. "Then I'll find someone who can give me one." He ended the call. He stood at the back of the garage looking at the gentian blue 911 Turbo S, the way a man looks at something beautiful that has been causing him pain, which is a particular kind of heartbreak that money makes more confusing, not less. Ruth Ann could have kept moving. She probably should have. She had a schedule: bathrooms first, then the kitchen, then the common areas, and Mr. But Hargrove's personal frustrations were not her department. But she had been listening to her son talk about Porsches since he was 17 years old, and she knew enough to recognize that the look on Cornelius Hargrove's face was the look of a man who had run out of answers. She said quietly from the doorway, "Mr. Hargrove, you mind me asking what's wrong with it?" He turned. He looked at her for a moment, not unkindly, but the way a man looks when he has to recalibrate the context of a conversation. "High RPM hesitation," he said. "Been chasing it for 7 months, 4 shops, $31,000. He said it the way you say something out loud when you've been carrying it alone, and the weight of it has finally made the saying of it unavoidable. They want to replace the ECU now." Ruth Ann nodded slowly. She said, "My son fixes Porsches." Cornelius looked at her. "He has a shop on Covington Highway. Carter's European. He's fixed a few Porsches. I know he's—" She paused. She was a careful woman who did not oversell things. "I know he knows them well." Cornelius looked back at the car. He had a habit of thought formed over 40 years in business, of measuring the source of information against the quality of the information. This was not always fair, but it had served him commercially. He nodded, slowly. "I'll think about it." He did not call that day. He did not call the following day either. Now that you know who Marcus is, have you ever met someone like him? Someone whose worth the world just couldn't see yet? Someone doing extraordinary work in a place the world wasn't bothering to look? Tell me about them in the comments. But what happened next was smaller than it sounds, and yet it set everything in motion. It was a Thursday, 2 days after Ruth Ann's mention of her son, and Cornelius had driven the Turbo S, gingerly, as one does with a car one distrusts, to a lunch meeting in Midtown. On the way back, sitting at a red light on Memorial Drive, the engine produced the hesitation in a more pronounced form than it had in weeks. Not a sputter, not a stall. More like a brief, wrong silence in the middle of a sentence. Cornelius had felt it in his sternum. He pulled into the parking lot of a CVS. He sat there for a moment. Then he pulled up his contacts, found the number Ruth Ann had given him before she left on Tuesday. She'd written it on a scrap of paper from her purse, old school, which somehow made it feel more trustworthy, and called. Marcus answered on the second ring. The conversation was short. Marcus asked 3 questions. What is the RPM range where you feel the hesitation? Has anyone checked the cam timing deviation on the VarioCam Plus system? And has any shop put the car on a 4-gas exhaust analyzer, not just an OBD reader? The line was quiet for a moment. Cornelius said, "No one has asked me those questions." Marcus said, "Can you bring it in tomorrow morning? 7 o'clock. I'll look at it before we open for the day." Cornelius showed up at 6:55. He drove down Whitmore Lane, turned onto Covington Highway, and pulled into the lot of Carter's European Repair for the first time. He sat in the car for a moment after he parked. He was looking at the sign. He was looking at the building, the former carpet warehouse, the painted block letters, with the 2 plastic chairs visible through the front window. He had a look on his face that was hard to read, the complex expression of a man making a private calculation. He got out of the car. Marcus came out of the side door before Cornelius reached the entrance. He wiped his hands on a red shop rag. He was wearing a gray work shirt with Carter's European embroidered on the chest in navy thread. He extended his hand. His grip was solid. "Mr. Hargrove." "Marcus." Cornelius looked him over. "You're Ruth Ann's boy." "Yes, sir." Cornelius looked at the shop, then back at Marcus. He said carefully, "I want you to understand what we're dealing with. I have had this car at Pinnacle, at Hendrick Performance, at a private specialist from Charlotte, and at a boutique in Buckhead that charges $450 an hour. Or the total spent is $31,000. The problem is not fixed." Marcus nodded. He did not look intimidated. He looked interested. He said, "Walk me through everything they did. In order, if you can remember it." They sat in the 2 plastic chairs by the front desk, and Cornelius talked for 25 minutes. He had the service records on his phone, photographed and organized in a folder he'd created in September, because Cornelius Hargrove organized everything. Marcus listened. He did not interrupt. He took no notes, but his eyes had the particular quality of someone cataloging information internally with precision. When Cornelius finished, Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Nobody checked the VarioCam timing." Cornelius frowned. "Or the Charlotte specialist. Did he pull cam timing deviation data from the DME? Not just the fault codes, the actual live timing deviation values, left bank and right bank, at 4,000 revolutions per minute and above?" Cornelius did not know. Because if the VarioCam Plus actuator on the right bank has a delayed response under load, which is a known issue on the 9A1 engine in the 991.2 Turbo S, especially after you go past 60,000 miles, it'll cause exactly what you're describing. High RPM hesitation, inconsistent but repeatable, no fault codes stored because the deviation is within the boundary the DME considers acceptable. It's not acceptable. It's just not detectable without the right test at the right load point. He stood up. He said, "Or let me put it on the lift. After 7 months and $31,000, after what every one of those shops put Cornelius through without ever finding the answer, what would you have done in his position right then? Would you have trusted Marcus? Let him know in the comments." What happened in the next 4 hours was, for those present, which was primarily Marcus and his lead technician, A quiet man named Deshaun Albright, who had been with Marcus since the beginning, a piece of work that belongs in the category of the quietly extraordinary. Marcus put the Turbo S on Lift 2. He connected his Durametric Professional Diagnostic Interface, a tool that accessed the Porsche DME at a depth that standard OBD scanners could not reach, and began pulling live data at idle. He checked the VarioCam timing deviation values on left bank and right bank at 1,200 revolutions per minute, 2,000, 3,000, and as he ramped the engine up in the bay, using a combination of the throttle and load simulation through the interface, the right bank VarioCam timing deviation at 4,200 revolutions per minute showed a value of 4.2 degrees, retarded relative to the commanded position. For a car at idle, in a parking lot, that number would be invisible. For a car at high RPM under load, accelerating hard, engine pulling, it would feel like exactly what Cornelius had been describing for 7 months. Marcus showed Cornelius the data on the laptop screen. He walked him through it the way Werner had once walked him through scope patterns. Not speaking down, but speaking precisely, because precision was respect. The VarioCam actuator solenoid on the right bank is responding slower than spec under load, not enough to trigger a fault code, because the tolerance the factory set is wider than it should be for the way this engine was tuned. But that timing deviation at high RPM creates a brief break in the combustion synchronization between banks. You feel it as a hesitation. It's not the fuel system, it's not the ECU, it's not the throttle body, it's this solenoid, and the oil control valve that feeds it is partially restricted. Probably sludge buildup from an oil change interval that went a little long at some point. He looked at Cornelius. The part is $340. Labor is 2 hours. I'll clean the oil passages, replace the actuator solenoid, re-index the cam timing, and road test it. On total charge is $840. Cornelius Hargrove was a man who had spent $31,000 on a problem that $840 would solve, and the way he received that information, the stillness of it, the controlled quality of his expression, was a testament to his discipline. But his hands, resting on the fender of the lift, tightened slightly. He said simply, "Do it." Marcus did it. He ordered the solenoid through his Porsche trade account. It arrived at the shop by 10:45 via same-day delivery from a parts distributor in Norcross. He had Deshaun pull the intake manifold to access the oil control valve, while Marcus began cleaning the VarioCam passages with a pressurized flush system. The work was meticulous. The kind of work that doesn't look impressive from the outside, because it is performed with the quiet confidence of someone who knows exactly what they are doing and doesn't need to perform the knowing. Cornelius sat in one of the plastic chairs, not on his phone, not reading, just watching. He had the expression of a man who had not watched people work in a long time. There was something in it that went beyond watching a car get fixed. By noon, the car was back on the ground. Marcus took it out for the road test himself. 15 minutes through the Covington Highway corridor and back around through Candler Road, running it up through the RPM range repeatedly, feeling for the hesitation. He came back to the shop and pulled back into the bay. He looked at Deshaun. Deshaun nodded once. Marcus walked to where Cornelius was standing. "It's gone," he said. Cornelius walked to the car. He stood beside it. He put his hand on the roof the way you put your hand on the shoulder of someone who has been sick and is, at last, well again. Then he walked around to the driver's side, got in, and drove it himself. Around the block, back out onto Covington, and then, because he needed to feel it under load, because 7 months of chasing something demanded more than one left turn, he took it up the on-ramp to I-20, ran it up to 110 miles an hour in a clear stretch, and brought it back down. He drove back into the Carter's European lot and sat in the car for a moment before he got out. When he came through the door, Marcus was at the front desk writing up the invoice. He put it on the counter. $840. Parts and labor. No upsell, no diagnostic fee. On no shop supplies line item. $840. Cornelius looked at it. He said, $31,000. Marcus looked at him carefully. He said, I know. 7 months. I know. Those other shops, Cornelius paused. The control was still there, but thinner now. They could have found this. Marcus measured his response. He was not a man who enjoyed speaking ill of competitors. It felt cheap, and Werner had taught him that a man's work speaks loudest when he stays quiet about other people's failures and loud about his own standards. He said, the variocam deviation diagnostic requires a specific tool and a specific test methodology at load. Not everyone has the Durametric Pro interface, and a lot of shops test at idle or at low RPM because it's faster. It's a process shortcut that's standard in a lot of places. It's not malicious. It's a gap. He said it without heat, without the flavor of someone positioning himself as superior. Just as a statement of fact, the way you might explain why a bridge failed without needing to hate the engineers. Cornelius wrote a check for $840. Then he stopped. He looked at the check. He set down the pen. He said, is it fair to say that what you just did, the specific diagnostic approach, the knowledge of the 9A1 engine, the particular tool, that most shops in Atlanta can't do what you just did? Marcus thought about it. I'd say most shops don't have the combination of the tooling, the Porsche-specific experience, and the diagnostic methodology. There are good shops, but the variocam issue on the 991.2 is well documented in the Porsche technical community and not well known in the general independent repair world. It falls through the gap. Cornelius nodded. He picked up the pen again. He wrote the check for $840. He slid it across. Then he said, I have 14 cars. Marcus waited. Not all Porsches. There's a 2020 AMG GT 63S, a 2018 Ferrari 488 Spider, a 1967 Shelby GT 500 that I use a classic car specialist for in Roswell, and 10 Porsches at various stages of need. He said the last word with the dry self-awareness of a man who had just spent $31,000 unnecessarily. I currently spend, between Pinnacle, Hendrick, and various specialists, something in the range of $40,000 to $60,000 a year on maintenance and repair. He looked at Marcus. But we are right at the moment. Everything is about to change for Marcus. Before I tell you what happened, what do you think Cornelius offered him? Drop your prediction in the comments. I would like you to be my primary shop for everything that's in your wheelhouse. The Porsches, the Mercedes. I'll keep the Shelby with the classic specialist. I'd want to establish a maintenance schedule for all 10 Porsches, bring each one in for a full baseline inspection, and have you as my first call when something comes up. In return, I'll pay your standard shop rates. No discounting, I'm not asking for that. And I'll prepay a $15,000 retainer against future work, which I'd replenish as it draws down. Marcus looked at him. Cornelius continued, I would also want to refer you to 3 other people in my immediate circle who have similar collections. Between the 4 of us, you'd be looking at a minimum of $120,000 a year in consistent work. Possibly more. The shop was quiet. Deshaun was in Bay 4 running a brake job on a customer's BMW 5 Series, and the sound of his air ratchet came through the wall in rhythmic bursts. Marcus looked at the invoice on the counter. He looked at the gentian blue 911 through the window of the shop bay door, sitting in the parking lot in the April morning light like an argument for beauty. He looked at Cornelius Hargrove, who was watching him with the expression of a man who had spent his career making decisions and knew a good one when it was standing in front of him. He said, I want to be straight with you about what we are and what we aren't. We're a 6-lift shop with 4 technicians. We are meticulous. We are thorough. We have Porsche and BMW factory training from 2 of my guys, and I have 17 years of hands-on experience with European vehicles specifically. But I am not a dealership. I don't have a loaner fleet. I don't have a waiting room with espresso. If that matters. Cornelius said, "If it mattered, I wouldn't have driven over this morning." Marcus extended his hand. They shook. And just like that, on a Wednesday morning in Decatur, Georgia, in a former carpet warehouse on Covington Highway, the problem that had taken 7 months and $31,000 to not solve was solved in 4 hours for $840, and the man who solved it came from 8 miles away, grew up learning engines from his father in a driveway on Glenwood Road, and had been operating a shop of quiet excellence a 1/4 mile from the estate of the man who needed him most. The world has a way of doing that, putting the answer close by and making you walk far away from it first. Marcus's crown was finally recognized. But I want to hear from you now. Have you ever had your moment where someone finally saw what you were capable of? Where your skill or your knowledge was finally given the room it deserved? Share that story in the comments. Someone watching needs to hear it. What came next unfolded over the following months with the steady, compounding quality of a good investment. The $15,000 retainer cleared by the following Friday. Cornelius's 2018 Porsche Cayman GT4 came in 2 weeks later for what its owner described as a rough idle that's been there since I bought it. Marcus found a cracked secondary air injection pump hose that had been present, undetected since the car left the lot. Repair time, 40 minutes. Cost, $95. Cornelius had paid $2,100 for the same car to be looked at twice at Pinnacle, both times receiving a shrug. Word traveled the way it travels among men of means, carefully, quietly, with the particular authority of one wealthy person telling another that they've found something real. By mid-June, 2 of Cornelius's referrals had become Carter's European customers. The first was a man named Douglas Ference, a 53-year-old orthopedic surgeon from Dunwoody with a 2022 Porsche Taycan Turbo S and a 2020 BMW M5 competition. Douglas had driven to Decatur with the skepticism of a man whose time was valuable enough to resent wasting it, and had left 2 hours later with the same expression Cornelius had worn. The precise, unrepeatable look of a person who has been dealing with a problem for months and has just had it explained clearly for the first time. The second referral was a woman named Carolyn Vance, a 48-year-old architect in Druid Hills who owned a 2021 Porsche 718 Cayman S and had been, she said, treated like I didn't know what car I owned at every dealership she'd visited. Or what she found at Carter's European was Marcus looking her directly in the eye during every conversation, speaking in complete sentences, explaining everything twice if she wanted it explained twice, and never once mansplaining to her about the machine she drove 45,000 miles a year. She sent him 2 more customers before the summer was out. By September, exactly 1 year after the hesitation in Cornelius's Turbo S had first appeared, Carter's European had a 3-week waiting list for new customers, had hired a 5th technician, a Porsche-certified mechanic named Antoine Freeman, who had been quietly miserable at a dealership in Sandy Springs, and was running at a pace that required Marcus to begin looking at adjacent commercial space for a possible expansion. For he did not do this quietly in the way of a man who had proved something. He did not announce it, did not post about it, did not carry around the vindication like a trophy. He continued to come in at 6:30 every morning, continued to eat lunch at his desk most days, continued to call his mother on Thursdays, continued to change the oil on his own 2008 Porsche Cayman. Not the flashy one, not the expensive one, the one with 187,000 miles on it that he'd bought for $14,000 and kept immaculate out of a conviction that caring for the ordinary things was what made you trustworthy with the extraordinary ones. There is something worth noting about Ruth Ann Carter in all of this. She had not arranged what happened. She had mentioned her son once, quietly, from a doorway, to a man who was standing in a garage looking at a car that had been defeating him for 7 months. She had offered information, and then stepped back. She had not advocated, not pushed, not called Marcus to alert him, not engineered the introduction beyond the one sentence it required, because Ruth Ann Carter had raised her children on a principle she'd inherited from her own mother, a woman named Essie who had lived in rural South Carolina and died at 89, still correct about most things. You don't have to fight for your worth if your work can speak. You just have to make sure the right ears are nearby. The work had spoken. The ears had been nearby. In October, Cornelius Hargrove did something that was not required of him, that no contract asked for, and that he performed in the particular way of a man who has been thinking about something for several months and has decided to do it cleanly. He called Marcus on a Tuesday morning. He said, "I've been doing some asking around. Commercial real estate on Covington Highway, the building adjacent to yours, the one that was previously a printing company. It came to market last month. The asking price is $840,000. He paused. "I would like to invest in your expansion. Not as a favor. As a business investment. I know what your work is worth. I've seen it. I've shown it to other people and they've seen it. I would like to propose a minority equity stake in any expanded entity in exchange for the real estate acquisition and a working capital injection. I'm not interested in running it. I want no operational control. I've done enough deals to know that a shop runs on its mechanic and not its owner, and the mechanic in this case is you." He said, "Think about it. Talk to a lawyer. I'll send you the term sheet when you're ready." Marcus held the phone for a moment after the call ended. He was standing in Bay 3, a 2020 Porsche 992 Carrera S, on the lift above him, the morning light coming through the open bay doors in long gold rectangles. He thought about his father, Theodore, and the 3-day weekend with the Accord engine in the driveway. He thought about Werner Conrad, who had looked at a 23-year-old black mechanic in his first week and decided, without ceremony or condition, to teach him everything. He thought about the sign above the bay door that he had painted himself in the winter of 2019, or on a Saturday morning when the shop was empty and the temperature was 41 degrees, and he had stood there in a work jacket with a brush and a can of exterior paint, making the name real. Then he called his lawyer. The deal closed in February. Carter's European auto repair, upon completion of the adjacent build-out, would occupy 12 service bays across 14,000 square feet, making it one of the largest independent European specialists in the metropolitan Atlanta area. The firm retained its name. Marcus retained majority ownership and full operational control. Cornelius received a minority equity stake, and, as he'd said, nothing else. There was no press release, no feature in Atlanta Business Chronicle, at least not yet. They're just a construction crew that arrived in the second week of February and began the process of turning a former printing company into something new. Ruth Ann Carter drove past it on a Thursday morning on her way to the Hargrove estate. She slowed down as she passed. She looked at the building, at the Carter's European sign on the original bay, at the construction fence, and the skeletal beginning of the expansion. She sat at the light for a long moment. Then she drove on. She was going to be on time. She was always on time. The hesitation was gone. Not just from the 911 Turbo S, which Cornelius Hargrove drove every clear weekend now without reservation or apology, pushing it through the mountain roads north of the city the way it was built to be driven, but from the story itself, yet from the 7 months of wrong answers and expensive guesses, and the particular grinding frustration of having a problem that the people with the credentials couldn't solve. That hesitation, in the engine, in the story, in the distance between a problem and its answer, was gone. What remained was the car, running clean, the shop, running right, and a man who had always known how to fix things, finally with the room to fix them properly. Sometimes the answer was on Covington Highway the whole time. Sometimes the person who held the key was the one you'd been paying to clean your house for 9 years. Sometimes the crown doesn't arrive in a boardroom or on a stage. Sometimes it arrives on a Tuesday morning when a man in a gray work shirt shakes your hand in a parking lot and says, simply, "Let me put it on the lift." And then he fixes it. If you've stayed with this story until now, I want you to do something. Before you scroll away, leave a comment. Not just a reaction. A comment. Tell me who the Marcus in your life is. The person doing excellent work in a place the world isn't bothering to look. The quiet expert. The overlooked craftsman. The person whose worth you know and the world hasn't caught up to yet. Tag them if they're on here. Let them know you see them. Because that's what this is about. Not the money, not the Porsche, not even the deal. It's about being seen. It's about a kind of excellence that doesn't announce itself, but is undeniable when you're in the presence of it. Every crown has a story. This one started in a driveway on Glenwood Road, with a father and a son, and a 1994 Honda Accord, 30 years ago.